So this is a 2012 Volvo XC70, and this is the front left brake. So I've already removed the wheel and the hub, and now I'm just removing the set screw that holds the disc in place. On the right side it was so tight it sheared off. This side it looks like I finally broke it. It's a Torx 50. You can get a Torx set, may as well get the whole set. By the time you buy two, you've paid for the set. And this one's coming out. So it looks like I'll put it back in. Next task is to remove this little spring, which holds the caliper against the caliper carriage. So this plate, and then the two arms, one going up right here, the other going down to the bottom part of the carrier. There's a little tab that goes into the caliper, and then these just have little wings on them that spring load and push the caliper towards the disc. That's just a pop with a screwdriver. And let's see if I can get it out with the video going. Yep, here it comes. There we go. Is to remove the little plastic covers that are right here. There's another one right down here. And underneath those is a hex nut. These were finger tight. If yours are tighter, flathead screwdriver will do the trick, which I may have to use on this upper one. These require a 7mm hex wrench. I couldn't find a socket. However, if you go to ipdusa.com, they have a 7mm socket, hex socket, for just a few bucks. If I were doing this again, I'd definitely get that. This works, but you're not in there too tight. So that hex wrench, out come the little slider bolts. These little guys, they just need a little cleaning up typically. Now with both the hex bolts out, you can just apply a little pressure to the caliper, get that piston to release a little bit. And the caliper comes loose. A little bit more pressure to it. Just use the screwdriver here. That should be enough. And then the caliper comes loose off the carriage. Guy at FCP Euro suggested putting a little zip tie to hold the caliper up, make sure that it doesn't fall loose. I'm going to need my second hand, but just zip tie it to the spring. The thing you're going to want to do is to get a C-clamp or a large channel locks, and just gently move the piston back into its housing all the way till it stops. Doesn't take much pressure, just take it slow. And there it is. So now the caliper is ready for the new pads and the new rotor. I'm going to remove the old pad, and I'll clean this up. In particular, I want to clean up these areas up here and down here. Just make sure they're free of any debris. And I usually wipe out the inside of the piston just to make sure it's nice and clean, dirt free. Check the seal, make sure that there's no cracking, no marks of any sort around it. This one looks good, nice and dry. This is where all the bearing surfaces are on the pads. So right here on the ear, underneath and on the bottom, maybe even a bit on the top of the ear. Likewise on the bottom part. These are spots where you're going to want to put some high temperature brake lubricant, as well as on the back of the pad. Okay, so here is the part now that the caliper is off and secured safely up on the spring, so that if it slips off of here, I won't strain the hose, the hydraulic hose. Don't want to have to open up that system. Now here's the part though that caused me to make this video. Nobody tells you, at least where I've looked, that these bolts on the caliper carriage, the part that attaches the caliper to the vehicle itself, those bolts have red thread lock in them. The only way to get those off with any sort of reasonable safety is you got to heat them. So take a propane torch and apply a little bit of heat to them. Be careful that you avoid the rubber on the boot. Also be careful, there's a line coming down. You can just see it down here, right in here. Be careful that you don't get the heat too close to that. What I was doing was just coming in directly right like this onto this part of the housing, this fitting. And then likewise on the bottom is much easier to get because there's nothing underneath here that could be damaged by the heat. So let's get a little heat on this sucker. Enough. That amount of heat was just enough. Had to use the breaker bar to get it out this far, but now just a ratchet. By the way, that's an 18 mil bolt in there. Be careful, it's hot. And now to tackle the next one. Caliper carriage off. You can see actually a little bit of the remnants of the red thread lock. I busted a few knuckles before I realized that it was red thread lock. So make sure you've got a propane torch handy so that you can get those released. Now, last step, just a little gentle persuasion. I'm not going to reuse this rotor, so don't worry. Go. And she's off for a little cleanup. And also up here in these areas, and also on the carrier in these spots. Since I don't have a stand for the camera, I'm just going to show you the spots and do them and then come back. Okay, I've already cleaned the rotor off both sides with some brake cleaner to make sure it's free of grease and oil. And I've already got the little set screw with the Torx 50 in there. Just going to snug it up a little bit. I put a little anti-seize on this nut so that it would come off easier in the future. Not give me the same problem I found I had on the other side. And here we go. All right. Now, nice and snug. Now it's just a matter of putting a little red thread lock back on these bolts and putting the carriage back in. That's already been cleaned up, these surfaces. and then I'll move up here and get the pads installed. So I just did a final torque with a breaker bar on the two bolts that hold the carriage to the front axle, and everything is snug and now ready to put the pads back. One pad goes into the piston with the little spring clips, and the other pad sits right out here. I'm going to get the lube on those first, and then I'll install. Okay, I've already installed both pads. Made sure I've got the some lubricant, Ceramic Extreme Brake Parts lubricant from Permatex on the back and on the ears, all the contact points. Likewise up here on the ears, as well as where it goes into the piston. Be careful on the little snaps on the back of this one. Make sure they all three go into the piston. You need a little bit of pressure, otherwise the one of the two side ears snaps can potentially go into the rubber boot, and you want to avoid that. Now I'm ready to put the caliper back on and reinstall the two slide bolts, the 7mm hex. I'm going to put a little lubricant on those as well, because the caliper slides on those. And I should be close to being done. Caliper on, and the hex bolts are in. You'll notice that the hex bolts are protruding a little bit, almost flush with the little rubber boot on the back, and that's to be expected because you've got a lot more material in here, and it's pressing the calipers outboard a little bit more. You'll also notice that when you put this spring clip back in, that it's going to be seated a little further outboard on the carrier, on the caliper carrier. And even with the hex bolts in and fully tightened, there's still a little bit of play in the caliper until you get this spring clip in, and then pump the brakes for the first time, and then everything tightens right up. That's about it. By the way, when you do any work, make sure you've got plenty of jack stands. I've got one under the axle right there, as well as on a very solid part of the frame. And I've left my jack in place with some tension on the jack as well. I even, just as a backup to my backup, I throw the tire under the front end of the car, and so that way I'm safe. Don't forget to remove the little tie up there, and thanks for watching. That's about it. I just wanted to make sure there was a video out here in particular that talked about the red thread lock and the need for heat on these so that you don't bust your knuckles like I did, as well as making sure that there was an XC70 2012, whatever that series is. I think it changed a couple of years later, but it ran for a good 6-7 years, the same set of vehicles. So yeah, if you got some assistance out of this, hit the like button. Thank you. By the way, also, if you noticed anything that I did wrong, obviously I want to fix it on mine, but leave a comment for others as well. I think I'm pretty much by the book here, but you know, I'm not a professional, so you know, take this advice at your own peril. Don't forget, like I almost did, these little caps have to go back on so that it keeps the hex bolt from getting all mucked up with road dirt. They just pop right in again, just as easy as they came out.